The assembly was called without warning, a rare occurrence in the regiment, which usually followed strict schedules. The soldiers filed into the briefing hall, a murmur of confusion rippling through the ranks. They were the elite, the best trained and most advanced combat unit in the galaxy, and rarely were they summoned for anything other than high-level strategy or direct action. Their general stood waiting, expression unreadable, but there was an unspoken intensity in the air. Something was different about today. As the last of the soldiers took their place, the general's gaze swept over them. A few whispered jokes, nervous laughter. They were accustomed to triumph, certain of their supremacy. What could they possibly learn that they didn't already know? Their species had dominated countless systems, pacified hostile worlds, and established an empire unrivaled in its reach. They had nothing to fear. And certainly not from creatures hailing from so-called Deathworlds, backwater planets teeming with beasts barely intelligent enough to stand upright. The general's voice cut through the low hum. Today's lesson is about a species you've likely never thought much of, he began, his words deliberate, each syllable commanding attention. A species from a Class 12 death world. A scoff came from somewhere in the back of the room, barely audible but enough to draw a few chuckles. Deathworlders, they thought. Primitive beings fighting for scraps on hostile planets, nothing to concern a soldier of their caliber. But the general's expression didn't waver. Humans, he said, letting the word hang in the air. You've heard of them, I'm sure. Some of you may even have encountered them in passing. He paused, eyes narrowing as he scanned the room, daring anyone to interrupt. But none of you understand them. Not really. The laughter died out. There was an unfamiliar weight to his words. The soldiers shifted uneasily in their seats. Humans? What could possibly be so important about a species that had never even expanded beyond its own solar system until relatively recently? They were primitive, weak, technologically inferior. And yet, the general was speaking about them with a level of seriousness that no one expected. You think you know strength, the general continued, because you've been trained on the most advanced worlds, with weapons that can tear apart planets. You believe you are invincible. But strength isn't just technology. It's will. It's survival. And that is where you will find no greater species than the humans. The soldiers exchanged glances, some skeptical, others beginning to sense the shift in tone. There was no bravado in the general's voice, no grandstanding for effect. He wasn't here to entertain or frighten them. He was here to teach them something they'd been blind to. I've seen them, the general said, softer now, but with a gravity that silenced the room entirely. I've seen what they're capable of. Humans do not fight because they want to win. They fight because they refuse to lose. They endure. When all hope is gone, when the odds are impossible, they find a way. The room was tense now, the arrogance fading. The soldiers sat straighter, no longer laughing, no longer dismissive. The general's voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. Let me tell you about a species that redefined warfare and survival in this galaxy. A species that has fought wars you cannot even imagine. And won. The soldiers leaned in, caught between disbelief and the growing suspicion that they were about to learn something that would challenge everything they knew. The general let the silence stretch, then with a sharp edge to his voice, he began his tale. Humans, he said, are not like any other species. They come from a world that should have killed them long ago. A world full of predators, diseases, and disasters that would have wiped out lesser beings. But they survived. And what you must understand is this, their world did not break them. It made them. Earth, the general said, pacing slowly, is a Class 12 death world. For those of you unfamiliar, that means it's one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. Gravity that's strong enough to crush many species. Atmospheres that vary from scorching heat to freezing cold. Ecosystems filled with predators, diseases, natural disasters, everything conspires against life. The alien soldiers shifted uncomfortably. They had trained on controlled environments, planets carefully selected for military perfection. Death worlds, however, were places no rational species would willingly call home. The general paused, letting the weight of Earth's classification sink in. Humans evolved on this planet. They didn't just survive it, they thrived in it, he continued. Unlike most species, they weren't sheltered. They had no advanced technology to protect them during their formative years. Every step of their evolution was a fight for survival. They weren't the strongest. They weren't the fastest. But they became the most adaptable. The soldiers' initial skepticism wavered. To evolve on a world like that? It didn't seem possible. But the general's tone was clear, this was not up for debate. Diseases wiped out millions of them. Entire cities were leveled by natural disasters. Predators larger and faster than any being you've encountered hunted them for millennia. And yet, they kept going. They learned how to survive, how to conquer the chaos around them. His voice was calm but firm, each word carving deeper into the soldiers' understanding. They faced war after war on their own planet, fought over land, resources, and ideologies. They destroyed each other more brutally than any external enemy could. He stopped in front of one of the soldiers, staring directly into their eyes. And they emerged stronger every time. Humans don't give up. When pushed to the brink, they push back even harder. There was a growing discomfort in the room. This wasn't just another species to categorize and file away in the galactic database. This was something else. The soldiers exchanged glances, some frowning, others thoughtful. The general continued, they've faced crises that would have ended civilizations. Global conflicts, some fought not with swords or weapons, but with their minds, strategy, manipulation, resilience. In what they call their Cold Wars, humans engaged in a deadly game of brinkmanship, teetering on the edge of mutual destruction for decades. And yet, not only did they survive it, they came out more advanced, more determined. He began to walk again, pacing slowly as if weighing each word. They built cities that could withstand hurricanes, designed technology that took them beyond their own planet, and reached out into the stars. This wasn't luck. It was necessity. Every challenge that would cripple another species is just another opportunity for humans to adapt. The silence in the room grew thicker. The soldiers no longer scoffed or exchanged smirks. They were beginning to understand. These weren't just survivors, they were conquerors of circumstance. And yet, even with all this, they still couldn't fully grasp the danger that humanity posed. The general stopped again, this time in the center of the room. I've seen them fight, he said, his voice softer now. Not for glory, not for conquest, but because they had no choice. Because giving up isn't an option for them. You think technology will save you from a Deathworlder? Technology is nothing to a species that can turn a wasteland into an empire. The soldiers listened in stunned silence. Humanity was not a race to be pitted or underestimated. They were not just primitive creatures struggling to survive on a hostile planet. They were a force of nature. And they hadn't even begun to fight on the galactic scale. They aren't the strongest physically, nor the most advanced technologically, the general said, his voice dropping lower. But they've mastered one thing better than anyone else, survival. They are the galaxy's ultimate survivors. And that's what makes them dangerous. The general's eyes narrowed as he recalled the first true encounter between humans and an alien force. They were outmatched in every conceivable way, he began. The opposing empire was far more advanced. Their ships were bigger, faster, armed with technology humans had never even imagined. To the aliens, it seemed like an inevitable victory. They didn't see humans as a threat, just an obstacle, something to sweep aside. The soldiers leaned in, their skepticism now mixed with curiosity. They'd heard tales of countless wars, but this one felt different. What the aliens didn't understand, the general continued, was that humans don't play by the rules. They don't fight on anyone's terms but their own. The battle began, as expected, with the aliens striking hard. They overwhelmed the human fleet, tore through their defenses. It looked like the end within the first few hours. He paused, letting the tension hang. But humans have a way of turning losses into opportunities. When their main fleet was obliterated, they didn't retreat or surrender. They adapted. Instead of fighting head-on, they scattered. The aliens found themselves chasing smaller, faster ships that seemed to vanish and reappear at will. It wasn't chaos, it was strategy. One of the soldiers shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't how wars were supposed to be fought. Battles were about superior firepower, about dominating the battlefield. But the general wasn't finished. Humans employed tactics the aliens had never encountered: guerrilla warfare, sabotage, misinformation. They hacked into enemy communications, turning the Empire's own systems against them. They spread false intelligence, led entire fleets into ambushes. In one battle, a single human ship took down a much larger alien vessel by turning the debris field into a trap. What the aliens saw as wreckage, humans used as cover and ammunition. The soldiers' expressions shifted, their disbelief giving way to a growing respect. These weren't the actions of a primitive species, they were the tactics of survivors who had been hardened by centuries of conflict. The general's voice grew quieter, almost reflective. The humans didn't just fight the Empire, they dismantled them, piece by piece. They studied the terrain, the weaknesses in the enemy's technology, the patterns in their behavior. When the aliens thought they were safe, the humans struck from the shadows, taking out key command structures, sabotaging vital systems. He paused, watching the realization settle into the soldiers' minds. The aliens, for all their technological superiority, couldn't understand what was happening. They weren't fighting soldiers, they were fighting something far more dangerous, a species that had spent its entire existence adapting to survive. The humans didn't need the best weapons. They were the weapons. Despite heavy losses, the humans kept pushing forward. Every defeat was a lesson, every setback an opportunity to learn. By the time the Empire realized they were losing, it was too late. The humans had already turned the tide. Their unconventional tactics, their sheer resourcefulness, broke the will of the alien forces. The Empire had never encountered an enemy like them before. They weren't just warriors, they were strategists, engineers, and survivors all rolled into one. The general's gaze swept over the room, watching as the soldiers absorbed the magnitude of what he was telling them. In the end, the humans achieved what no one thought possible. They won. Despite their primitive beginnings, despite being outgunned and outnumbered, they secured a victory that would echo through the galaxy. And they did it not because of their technology, but because they knew how to thrive in chaos. There was silence in the room, heavy with the weight of this revelation. The soldiers began to realize that human warfare wasn't just about tactics or strategy, it was about survival at all costs. And humans were experts at surviving where others would have perished. The general's voice softened, but the edge remained. You see, humans don't fight for conquest or glory. They fight because it's in their nature. They fight because they have no other choice. And when you face an enemy like that, you don't just battle their weapons, you battle their very will to survive. And no species in the galaxy has a stronger will than a Deathworlder. The general's tone shifted, becoming more deliberate. It wasn't just in space where humans proved themselves. I'll tell you a story about a time when a human ship crashed on one of the most hostile planets in the galaxy. A planet with no breathable atmosphere, temperatures that fluctuated between freezing and boiling, and creatures so aggressive that most species wouldn't last a day. The humans? They thrived. He glanced at the soldiers, gauging their reactions. Their ship was damaged beyond repair. No communications, no hope of rescue. The local fauna, apex predators of the planet, attacked within hours. Every species that had ever landed there had been hunted down, torn apart by the beasts. And yet, the humans didn't panic. They didn't surrender to fear. The soldiers were silent now, fully engrossed. Outnumbered, with limited supplies, they immediately began to adapt. They scavenged what they could from their wrecked ship, turned broken pieces into makeshift weapons and tools. They built shelters from the planet's hostile environment, using the very dangers around them as resources. They observed the creatures, studied their behavior, and turned their knowledge into strategy. The humans even managed to domesticate some of the smaller, less aggressive animals, turning potential threats into assets. He let that sink in. Domesticate? It sounded absurd, but the general's expression was dead serious. They transformed the environment from enemy to ally, extracting water from toxic air, creating fire from alien plants that would burn for days. What would have been a death sentence for any other species, they saw as an opportunity. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about mastering the world around them. Every night, the creatures attacked their camp, relentless, drawn by the scent of potential prey. But the humans had already fortified their position, turning the landscape into a natural defense. They set traps using the planet's own resources. What the local predators had once relied on, stealth, speed, ferocity, became their undoing. The humans outsmarted them. There was an audible shift in the room. The soldiers, previously skeptical, now looked uneasy, as if they were starting to realize what humanity was truly capable of. This wasn't just survival, this was dominance over an environment that should have killed them. The assaults didn't stop, the general continued, but neither did the humans. They fought off wave after wave of attacks. And while the creatures were relentless, the humans were relentless too. They didn't just defend their territory, they expanded it. They built up defenses, created new weapons from the planet's natural resources, and within weeks, they had secured enough ground to establish a functioning colony. They adapted faster than the planet could throw challenges at them. His voice softened, as if marveling at the sheer audacity of it all. By the time they were found, weeks later, they hadn't just survived, they had thrived. They had established a sustainable colony, tamed the environment, and, most remarkably, managed to avoid significant casualties despite the relentless assaults. The soldiers were now visibly shaken. The idea that humans, so seemingly fragile compared to many of the galaxy's species, could dominate such a hostile environment was beyond anything they'd imagined. These were not just survivors, they were conquerors of worlds that no other species would dare to inhabit. The general's expression darkened, as if sharing a final, sobering truth. Humans don't just endure. They take what should kill them, and they use it to their advantage. They turn danger into opportunity, chaos into order. Where others would perish, they learn, adapt, and thrive. The room was heavy with awe and a subtle undercurrent of dread. The soldiers now understood that humans didn't merely survive the impossible, they made the impossible work for them. These weren't just tales of survival, they were proof that humans were a species capable of turning any hostile situation into their own victory. With a final look around the room, the general concluded, and that, soldiers, is why you should never underestimate a Deathworlder. Where others fail, they find a way. Every single time. The general stood still, his voice quiet but deliberate. What you've learned today is not about a species' physical strength, or the power of their technology. It's about something deeper, something far more dangerous. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. Humans are defined by their adaptability. Their resilience. Their sheer, relentless will to survive. The soldiers sat in silence, processing everything they'd just heard. The arrogance that once filled the room had evaporated, replaced by something far more serious. Respect. And a lingering sense of unease. Deathworlders like humans don't need superior weapons or fleets, the general continued. They survive by constantly adapting, by turning every weakness into a strength. They've lived on the edge of extinction for as long as they've existed. And instead of breaking them, it's made them stronger. He walked slowly through the rows of soldiers, each one more sober than before. Underestimating a Deathworlder like a human is the greatest mistake you could make. Other Deathworlders may exist, yes, but none like the humans. No species has faced what they've faced, and come out of it more capable, more dangerous. A soldier hesitated, then raised their voice. If they're so strong, then why haven't they conquered the galaxy? The general stopped, considering the question. His answer came after a moment of quiet reflection. Because they don't need to. His voice was calm, as if explaining a simple truth. Their strength isn't in conquest. It's in survival. Humans don't crave domination the way some species do. They don't need to rule over others. What drives them is something far more primal, the need to endure. To persist, no matter what the galaxy throws at them. The room felt heavier now, the weight of the realization sinking in. The humans weren't seeking power for its own sake. They didn't fight to conquer, they fought to survive, and that made them far more dangerous than anyone who craved control. The general resumed pacing, his words measured. Imagine a species that doesn't crumble in the face of catastrophe, but rises. One that doesn't rely on superior technology, but on its ability to adapt faster, learn quicker, and outlast every challenge. That's what makes humans unique. That's why they must be respected. The soldiers were no longer questioning or doubting. The tone of the briefing had shifted completely, from arrogance to somber understanding. The general could see it in their faces, the weight of what it meant to face a Deathworlder, especially a human. He stopped again, addressing them with a gravity that underscored his final point. One day, we may fight alongside them. Or against them. And when that day comes, remember this, they won't fight for glory. They won't fight for power. They will fight because they have to. And when you fight someone who has no choice but to win, who always finds a way to survive, you're facing something far more dangerous than any fleet or weapon. The silence in the room was profound. No one moved. No one spoke. The lesson was clear, humans were not just another species to categorize or study. They were something altogether different. A force that thrived where others faltered, that endured when others failed. The general gave one last look at his soldiers, his voice quiet but firm. Never underestimate a Deathworlder. Especially a human. They may not seek to rule the galaxy, but they will always find a way to survive it. And that's the most dangerous strength of all. He turned toward the exit, leaving the room in reflective silence. The soldiers, once confident in their superiority, now carried a newfound respect, and perhaps, a lingering fear, of the Deathworlders they had once scoffed at. The general's parting words echoed in their minds. Remember, they don't need to conquer the galaxy. They just need to survive. And that's what makes them unstoppable.